Matt Dorfman is an internationally recognized designer and illustrator. He is the art director of the New York Times Book Review and former art director of the op-ed page. He maintains a one-person office specializing in work for publishers, film, theater, and other cultural institutions. We're here to talk about his article, The Best Book Covers of 2020, that appeared in the New York Times. Welcome, Matt, to the Bibliophile.
Thank you so much.
Okay, before we get into books, what is the difference between designing the op-ed page and the book review section?
There's a lot of them. Most significant difference is time. Everything's very deadline centric at a newspaper. Basically, when I worked at the op-ed page, it was standard operating procedure that I would go into work in the morning and not have any idea what I was going to do. I'd have to run upstairs and talk to and meet with my editors and figure out what we were going to do, at which point they would send me a draft of something that I had to read in nanoseconds and then assign shortly thereafter, and get sketches ideally by early afternoon and have something to show for myself by 4 o'clock. So it was, that was very much like a regular daily sprint.
Yeah.
And sometimes you did it twice if they decided to switch in something else in the middle of the afternoon.
Right.
So you learn how to get resourceful fairly quickly and get a sense of who's, would be around and willing and able to work with you on something like that. And it's also, the op-ed page is like, it's opinion, like it's editorializing. With books, we're given the benefit of, I have whole days to assign something and give somebody some space to work and conceptualize. And we're actually, most of the time with the art, we're not editorializing at all. We're trying to dial in on what the essence of the book is about. We're leaving whatever criticism might surface in the review out of it, and we're just trying to capture what the meat of the story is. With the illustrations and with the art and the photography that we pull in to book review, we do have a chance to expand visual literacy where we can. And that's really kind of like my broadest personal mission and mandate with everything that I do at work. It's like there's so much great writing that comes in, and obviously some pretty top tier reporting that I feel like anytime we have an opportunity to make a new connection with what a visual stands to represent or use to talk back to that piece of writing.
I've got my bibliophile reference library.
Oh, okay.
So what I've got here, I don't know if you've ever seen it. It's called By Its Covers. By Its Covers, Ned Drew and Paul Sternberger. Anyway, I'm going to quote from the introduction by Dick Bass. When a text is published and the book is designed and printed, it becomes a physical manifestation, not just of the ideas of the author, but of the cultural ideals and aesthetics of a distinct historical moment. And I was struck reading your intro to your article about the fact that you start off with the pandemic.
Well, it's difficult not to. I guess that article, and really that whole feature, because it only runs once a year, because it's not a monthly roundup of covers that I like, it's an annual one. It really, I guess I use that intro space to kind of take the temperature of the kind of year it was. The previous year, if I'm remembering correctly, I guess what I was thinking about more than anything at the time was impeachment. It was either underway or it was a different kind of cultural fracturing. And we just kind of crash landed from one right into another. So those book, I mean, and in addition to which, it's those book covers are more likely than not having been designed in the previous year, but they're just coming to the surface. We're just experiencing them and coming into contact with them now. So most of what I'm thinking about whatever left an impression on me with regards to book covers, I'm really, it's like I'm taking stock of how I feel personally throughout the year, and what, having been made the year before, ends up changing in some way by virtue of who we are and how we're coming into contact with it in the cultural climate that we are.
It's funny because it wasn't the first thing that would enter my mind about the book cover itself. There would be certain aesthetic qualities, formal qualities that I might look for. The problem is you can't predict the future. So these were designed during impeachment, and yet the zeitgeist is now pandemic.
The design choices that go into something like that don't necessarily matter. It's like the world is going to change no matter whatever choices you're making in the moment with anything. Yeah. But it's the same. I think it operates on the same principle as as songwriting or any other kind of like higher form of fine art. Like once you make a thing, you are giving it away. When you put it out there, it does, to the degree that a designer can feel any sense of authorship over a book cover, and that is kind of like a really thorny thing, because there's so many other opinions and conditions and factors, and some of them capitalist, that go into that. When it does go out there, I mean, to the degree that it was ever yours, it really, really ceases to be yours anymore. You then become the receiver of everybody else's feedback, should you get any. And, also that relationship between the cover and the reader then changes another time, when someone actually ends up committing to reading this book. If you're lucky, or rather if you've done your job well, the cover will really go away, and it'll mean something, hopefully different and more significant to you when the book is over.
I was struck by the fact that it was your mood and what was going on in the world that had an impact on your judgment of these covers.
Oh, that also might come from a reaction of my own insecurities that I feel about actually being put in a place of judgment of that kind. The term imposter syndrome gets thrown around, and I don't know that I would call it that exactly, but I've never worked in a publishing house. I mean, I have designed covers, but it's always been on a freelance basis. And I don't, it's like I don't want to presume to know, the challenges and obstacles. But aside from that, it's like the books that you read in a year, can color your year in the same way that any, that any other, movies or television or any other kind of cultural interaction would. And so, I don't know. It's always been very, very difficult for me to divorce what I'm looking at and what I'm taking in from the aesthetics of it. I mean, the aesthetics of it obviously play like a significant role. And if something is so alarmingly startling and captivating and novel that you can't ignore it, that's certainly one thing. But it's difficult for me to ignore the other stuff. It's like I'm a person walking around in the world.
Yeah. Well, you bring a certain expertise to the judgment, though, obviously.
A little bit. I mean, I've got, I hesitate to call myself an expert on anything, but I do have opinions, yeah.
Let's look at, and we will look at each one of the, or a number of the choices that you made. But here's another quote. The cover is the first communication with the reader, a graphic representation, not simply of its content, but of its point in history. That's another sort of reference to pandemic. In the history of American design, in the history of American literature, and in the history of American culture. It's a physical manifestation of an evolving American intellectual tradition. And what do you think about that?
I think because it's still an agent of escape, the cover isn't necessarily beholden to speaking, specifically about one catch-all thing, but I don't know. It's like how do you produce something visual that touches on the spirit of a year? I mean, the general collective impression is that the year was bad. I certainly felt like I was more stressed and strained this year than I had been in previous years. But I also encountered like a lot of really surprising joy and happiness and gratitude for a lot of things that I hadn't really counted on when the year started. So I can't discount that either. So I mean, I guess anything that, if we're talking solely in terms of covers that left an impression on me, like if it left an impression on me, if it was loud enough, or if I felt that it was created with enough thoughtfulness and attention to all these little tiny agents that are floating about in the temperature, and not just the pandemic, I mean, and not just Black Lives Matter and all the other highly justifiable racial strife that was happening, in addition to all the other political stuff. It's difficult for me to ignore all the personal stuff that comes into that as well. There's all the other incidental like happiness and joy that you can kind of snatch from here and there in the middle of all of that suffering.
So what you're saying then again is that the zeitgeist and your own personal reaction to what's taking place does have an impact on how you would judge a dust jacket.
Oh yeah, it couldn't not. And I mean, it's also, it makes it easier for me personally if I don't, I mean, I'm doing this as a representative of the New York Times, but the New York Times is not the last judgment in the whole of book design, nor should we be. It helps me personally if I think of that feature as one voice of many. In that regard, it makes me feel better personally if I personalize it.
So the question is, do dust jackets define who we were, who we hope to be, and what we've become? Because that's the sort of high-minded rhetoric I'm getting out of by its cover, the book. Mm-hmm. Would you agree with that or disagree with that?
I think it puts a lot of responsibility on a book jacket.
I'm thinking of the Pushpin group. They had a kind of a calculated eclecticism about them. The book jacket designers, it's a bit like a novelist. They can pick and choose from anything they want and throw it in there.
Yeah.
So is that what you look for, is sort of interesting uses of different types of schools of design, for example?
Absolutely. I mean, to the degree that nothing's original anymore, the context really counts for a lot. So if you have an opportunity, use some example of antiquity and use it in a context that feels completely modern and fresh in a way that serves the story or the book effectively. It becomes a matter of really being, as a designer, like highly attuned to those opportunities and to those moments. Yeah, I'm absolutely like that. I get very excited when I see stuff like that. I guess what's conflicting about that is that, sometimes the book doesn't necessarily demand that it needs to be that way. I mean, you are always at the mercy of serving the story faithfully, and to a larger extent, the voice of the author faithfully. Like a lot of those opportunities come from recognizing, the writing and the tone.
How do you incorporate the commercial and still make a serious artistic statement, or can you?
It's incredibly challenging. Do you think I've made serious artistic statements in the covers that I've made? I guess I'd argue that I haven't, not for lack of trying. It's incredibly hard. I think it comes back to being attuned to the opportunities that you're presented with each book that you're given. If you're given a manuscript that has to do with a lot of socio-political concerns that are affecting real people, it's arguably selfish, to try to make an artful statement out of that. Like if you have a responsibility to draw attention to like a real legitimate problem that's causing people to be, subjugated or killed, or I don't know what's worse than being killed, but, versus like if you get like a very idiosyncratic piece of fiction that plays with form and deliberately breaks up the narrative in some way, then you have an opportunity and then you have a responsibility to be as artful as you can within the bounds of what that manuscript is dictating. Like, so it is a very case-by-case basis. Like, is it possible, to reconcile something artful with the commercial in that regard? I hope so. that's how I kind of got involved with a lot of this stuff. I didn't know the degree to which I was interested in doing this even in high school, like when it's like when the weekends would go by and I'd spend those weekends in used bookstores just kind of like leafing through all these books and these covers and, wondering about like what kind of lives these people had led, that they ended up, birthing all manner of words and all this crazy art that I was looking at from decades past that had been, rendered onto these covers somehow. You want to believe that there's some kind of artful possibility in that. Every generation is different. We have different financial obstacles and budget obstacles now than we did like in the 80s and the 70s as far as publishing is concerned. Nobody ever really got into this to get rich. But it's also equally dangerous to get into it with the hopes of being like a full-blown artist out of it, because you're dealing with so many other opinions and so many other concerns that come along with it, to say nothing of the story that you're responsible for reflecting, truthfully. It'll be interesting to see as time goes on and the more physical books become treated as like legitimate luxury objects, to see how much of that artfulness either takes over or whether the money train takes over. I guess, and it's weird to think of that as, I don't like to think of it as a binary choice in which one way goes another, but because there are plenty of examples that run contrary to that.
Is there a hierarchy then? Like, I've got to sell this book. Is that number one in your mind or not?
Not for me personally. Again, like I don't work for a publisher, so it's not a good business choice, but I do have the freedom to walk away from a project if it isn't going in a place that I really feel like is interesting or fair. I'm not ordinarily, when I'm starting, I'm not really thinking about anything explicitly commercial, but outside of ensuring that somebody is going to have to like actually read the title and the author's name for that matter.
Is that in your hierarchy of judgment then, when you judge these books, the book covers? Is it, okay, this is going to sell that book, that's why I'm choosing it?
No, I guess what's first in my hierarchy of judgment is, I guess if I'm being honest, it's envy or jealousy of a kind. Not necessarily that somebody got to work on this particular project, because I have no idea how fun or how agonizing it might have been, but it's...
Yeah. I just wish I had done it, you mean?
As a designer, you spend so much time in your own head, trying to think of something that can connect to the manuscript, that can also, simultaneous to that, connect to an erstwhile stranger. It's like you're thinking about strands in the culture that can link from your brain to somebody who you've never met before, that can also tether back to this story. So when I see covers that present solutions or representations of things that I know that I would never arrive at in my own head, that stokes all manner of professional jealousy and envy. And that's really, I try to channel that in a positive way, giving those designers something to do for the New York Times, or honoring that cover.
So in other words, the more jealous you are, better the book cover.
Yeah. Well, and also, I was talking about legibility earlier. If something's illegible and it's illegible in a way that makes me curious, then I'm equally excited, and I might even be made more jealous out of something like that. If you're given an opportunity to be that crazy, or if you're crazy is not a great word. I guess the simplest example I could think of is that, like, if you have an opportunity, if you're working with somebody who is willing to forego putting the title of the book on the cover or the author's name on the cover, it's like, oh no, you can save that for the spine, or you can save that for the back. Or if you're particularly fortunate to leave that stuff off entirely and just have that be part of the experience of opening the book and discovering it on the inside, then you have a responsibility as great and as significant to make a compelling visual on the front of that book as you would for a piece of nonfiction that's very serious minded, that's dealing with real human consequence, that requires the utmost clarity and legibility. So I think the responsibility of being as out there and as crazy and as abstract as you can is as significant as going in the other direction, as being as clear and as vivid as you can, depending on what that book is. For me, it becomes a matter of like looking at a cover, looking at what the book is about, and thinking to myself, like, was this designer able to make the most of the opportunity that they were presented with?
Okay, that's good. Well, My favorite, how many were there in total?
I believe there were 12, restricted by print. I can if I squeeze any more than 12 on that page, they're going to get small and too small.
Right. My favorite was The Art of War by Sun Tzu.
That Jaya did, yeah.
Yes, this is The Red Pill by Hari Kunzuru, and the designer was
Jaya Maselli.
Yes, you know what? I printed it out, and yes, there we are. Okay, so I just loved it. I'm trying to put words to it. It just was such a cool feel for me. I could almost feel that armor on that page. And I would invite listeners to go to the New York Times and find your article, which is simply called The Best Book Covers of 2020. So the metal of the armor, these little sort of semicircular pieces, they actually infringe on the type of the title, which I like. It's kind of tucked underneath there.
That really created a beautiful tension. That choice of photo, I can't recall specifically where she found it from, but she found a way to really position that type in a way that showcased the armor in a context that you don't know whether the armor is being intended as a point of offense or defense or both. But I thought it took like a very smart, agnostic approach to what happens before a fight.
That's interesting. So you read that into just looking at the cover.
Oh yeah, I have to live with myself 24 hours a day. This is what goes through my head every time I pick up a book.
Okay. So again, can you just articulate why that's one of the 12 then? Because why?
Well, I mean, it made me feel something. I'm not the sort of person that walks around thinking to myself, oh, I should really pick up The Art of War. It's like it's on the list, but it's a very long list of
Sure.
things that I just haven't gotten around to yet. And again, because of how she was able to, consider the idea of combat, or what I found to be more interesting, what was combat adjacent. Like there's no blood on that cover, there's no fighting on that cover, there's nothing that screams anything that's overly aggressive, but she presents the idea of fighting in a way that's very strategic and very thoughtful, and something that requires a lot of planning. And I just thought I thought using that armor as a visual vessel to create the suggestion of deliberation, of planning, of strategy was just incredibly smart. It made me jealous.
Yeah, good. Like there's a repetitive image of this armor. It reminded me of sort of regiments of soldiers lined up.
No, that's another great observation. Yeah, why didn't I think of that? Something like that you would hope would make it more special as a reading experience. Like when I do eventually get around to picking up The Art of War off my reading list, and I start committing myself to this, being like, all right, I'm finally doing this. I'm going to read The Art of War. That's the one I want to read. Like, that's the copy that I want to have.
Well, that's the interesting thing about this title, isn't it? It's so old that there's like a bunch of different publishers can publish it. There's no copyright on it other than the introduction.
Presumably that allows for it to be a relatively open brief. I mean, aside from the fact that you don't want to be repetitive and do anything that's been done before, but it's exciting to grab a hold of something like that, that's an idea like that that's already well in the public consciousness, and frame it in a way that feels, I don't even know that it needs to feel contemporary. I mean, the jacket itself does feel very contemporary, but I think that will feel equally contemporary decades from now.
Well, the other thing too is perhaps it reflects this particular translation as well.
Very possible.
Yeah,
actually, I didn't even really spend time thinking about what the nature of the translation was. I was that struck by the cover.
Yeah, I should just say one thing here, and that is I have read The Art of War maybe 20 years ago, and this is sad but typical. I don't remember a damn thing about it. So even if it's on your list.
Doubly disappointing. I was going to ask you how it was.
I really don't remember a damn thing about it, and that's the thing about being well read. You're well read for, let's say about 6 months after you've read the book. Then, at least in my experience, forget about it.
No, that's a filing cabinet that fills up really, really fast. I think a couple of years ago, once I really started upping my book regimen year to year, I would look back on everything that I had consumed through that year and thought to myself, wow, I should really be retaining more of this.
Yeah, that's why you have Commonplace book. Okay, so another cover that I really liked, and I'll just throw my 2 cents in quickly here. It's a red pill, the red pill. So the author is Hari Kunzru, and the designer is John Gaul.
All right. Well, I mean, I guess in the interest of full disclosure, all right. Well, for one thing, John Gaul illustrates a collage in the book review every week in the back section called the shortlist. So, I mean, I guess also problematically, John's work was kind of one of those gateway drugs for me. Also, that kind of led me to think, oh, this guy seems like he's having a good time. I'm completely flummoxed by that cover. I know what the book is about, but I still don't understand for the life of me what that association with that gradient geometric polyglot has to do with that painting. And I don't know how a lot of other people feel about this. Like when I'm flummoxed in that way by a piece of art, like I'm really like I'm incredibly excited. I mean, when that happens to me in real life, I'm terrified and very upset. But when it happens to me in the context of art or books and of reading, then I'm really, really fired up. Yeah, I have no idea what that. I know what the book is about. I have no idea what the significance of that particular pairing is, but it's handled with so much consideration and thoughtfulness. Like there's so much deliberation into those choices. I have a hard time thinking that he was sitting there just kind of throwing that stuff together and thinking to himself, all right, quit, I'm done. Although he very well may have. I don't know. I have no idea what goes on in his mind. He's a wilderness, John Gaul.
He's a wilderness? That's a good description.
He's a human wilderness.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? And again, the reason I like it is because I happen to be a big fan of Caspar David Friedrich, the painter.
Sure.
So he's sort of like a brave new world individual, and he's being blotted out by this weird looking sphere.
It's like inside of a square. What is that? It's very monolithic.
So it gets you questioning, I guess. It's got you thinking, what the hell is that? And that's why you picked it.
Yeah, that's the sweet spot for me. I like looking at things and thinking, what the hell is that? I've been doing that with Cy Twombly's paintings for the better part of 30 years.
Okay. I'm going to let you say, because you're probably going to pick within the 12. Are you going to go with any within the 12 that you prefer or not?
Oh, you want me to single out like favorites within favorites?
Yeah, well, I'm just going to go with one more, and that is the Roddy Doyle Love.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that Sarah Mae Wilkinson did. Yeah, it's beautiful. Hang on. I'm pulling up that list as well. Oh, sorry, give me a second.
Okay. Now, just to describe it, it's basically a big glass of Guinness. That's what we got with the word love on it and Roddy Doyle's name at the bottom.
And something like that, I mean, I hesitate to call it simple because it's not. But it is just like it's a beautiful association because Sarah Mae Wilkinson's a really great designer. You know, she is a designer who, with this cover, clearly recognized the opportunity that she was given. She was given this gift of a title, and she knew that it was about two guys hanging out at a pub, drinking, getting progressively more and more sloshed and unburdening themselves. You know, it's like when you take the title and you imprint it on, onto the booze as opposed to the actual people, you just create this really compelling relationship, and you start asking a lot of other ancillary questions that you would hope would echo the reading experience when you pick up the book. You're like, oh my God, like if love is a beer, then how have I been acknowledging love, like in my own life, and how the hell are these guys doing it? Are they broken, or are they onto something?
Well, it certainly does speak to Guinness drinkers, because they love their drink, don't they?
They can be quite possessive. I'm not one of those people. Stouts don't really work for me, but looking at that cover made me think, perhaps I should try a stout again. Maybe I've gone without them for too long.
Yeah, so it's selling the booze as well as the book.
Yeah, no, it's very possible. If ever again I pick up another stout, I'll have that book cover to help assign some blame. I can blame my next hangover on that book cover.
Yeah, you have to drink more Guinness than you do regular beer to get a hangover, from my experience.
You'd be surprised. I'm a lightweight. I can get pretty buzzed off something in a toothpaste cap.
Okay, so why don't you pick a couple that really kind of you've got a good story for? Let's put it that way.
Okay. The one that kind of broke my head a little bit, or I'll say the two that really stood out for me among these that when I saw them immediately, I thought to myself, oh my God, absolutely, these guys need to be represented. It's a little bit unfair, but this the Penguin Books Great Ideas repackaging of Sojourner Truth's In I, a Woman, I felt accosted when I saw that. I just the volume of the language, and the way that David Pearson really just used one typeface, and if you count white, 3 colors to make something so loud and unignorable. That was one of a series of 7, or if not 7, God, there might have been more than 7. I can't remember. Anyway, he had sent me the whole series, and when you see the whole series arranged together, you do find yourself having to fight the compulsion to include the whole series, because they're so, again, it's like the colors are uniform, but the styles, and some are very type reliant, some are image reliant, and some do like basically turn type into images. But there's so much variety in the whole of the series that it's like your eyeballs are ping-ponging every which way. You're trying to think, oh my God, which one of these am I picking up first? The Sojourner Truth one stuck in the mind the longest, largely because of what we've been going through. Well, I don't want to say what we've been going through, but what we've been, like what I, as a reasonably privileged white person, have been witnessing for essentially my whole life, but really build up to a pretty alarming fever pitch this past year, just with everything that relates to Black Lives Matter, and how something that was coming from that place was recontextualized in a modern moment. So that left a considerable impression.
Pull that sentence out of the text himself, you think, then?
I believe he did. I mean, if he wrote it, then that's a little disappointing.
No, it must have come out of the text, because there are a little quote marks around it, but I just wonder if he did that, or if someone on the team just pulled out a bunch of potential quotes for him.
Oh, I'd be curious about that myself. I don't know. I mean, I believe the general mandate of that series, as he's designed it, has been often to pull quotes directly from the book and find ways to capture them in that way. So
yeah, okay. He really is a giant in the business too, right?
He's great. Yeah.
Yeah.
He's found a way to do quite a lot with very little. Typographically speaking.
His name came up, yeah. His name came up in a conversation I had with a designer in France. He's done some work with a French publisher that's just stunning. Very, very colorful. Almost the opposite of this, unless I'm thinking of someone else, but I don't think so.
Oh, do you remember what the series was called?
I'll send it to you. I was sort of looking at it. I was thinking, do I see a woman in a dress in all of that type? And I'm thinking 1920s flapper. That's about all I got out of that.
Oh no, I didn't. I didn't, and I don't even think that it's necessary. I think the whole MO of the collection seems to be just like putting these great ideas front and center, and just using the language to speak with such volume and confidence. I guess, looking at that one, I kept looking at it and thinking to myself, wow, what else am I angry about?
Yeah.
I guess another one that really stuck out to me was June Park's, or rather it was Amina Kane's novel Indelicacy that June Park designed. This is another one like Red Pill, like John Gaul's Red Pill cover, where I'm looking at something that I'm completely flummoxed by, and I need to know what it's about. And I know we absolutely reviewed this book in the section, and I remember vividly reading the review and thinking to myself, this book sounds insane. I want to read this. And the plot for which has now completely left my head. So I can't remember specifically what it's about. I mean, that still plays to the cover's strength, because I'm looking at, I wouldn't even know what to describe what this is. It looks like it took a lot of different elements of antiquity and somehow made them kaleidoscopic and mirroring one another. But the type is also set in the context of an art piece caption. And, it's like, that is a kind of thing that's, like, it's very clever on its face. And it's the kind of thing that if handled, if you're a little heavy handed about that, it can feel a little too clever by half and a little cloying. But here it's presented with such a sense of mystery and confoundingness that it's very, very difficult to stop looking at. And also, another thing that's really, really fun, if you actually have the book and you can get up really, really close to it, I'm reasonably confident that all of this is drawn. I believe it's drawn and very likely manipulated digitally, but I think she drew all this. If I look at it closely enough, I don't want to say that for certain, but my suspicion is that she made the lion's share of this cover herself out of whole cloth, in which case, respect.
Yeah, technical expertise.
Yeah. To be able to do that in a way that doesn't sacrifice your mystery.
There's kind of a negative photograph feel to it.
There is. I think just because, there's that negative positive tension insofar as that the background is brighter than the foreground. So you end up having that tension and that contrast. And from a distance, it does look particularly photographic. But again, when you get up really, really close, I don't think it is.
Yeah. Okay, so the way to get on the list for next year is to confuse you. Is that it?
No, that's usually the going concern. Yeah, just have to appeal to my sense of perpetual uncertainty about the fate of the world.
Well, the interesting thing is that next year, the jackets, the book covers, are really going to reflect the pandemic a bit more than this year's, obviously, right?
Theoretically, it'll be interesting to see how much of what life looked like in 2020 manifests itself on the covers of 2021. Your hope, it's a hope, is that it's done quietly, if not quietly, then with all the incidental stuff that amounts to a life that ends up becoming part of the visual ether. We're not buried in like this tsunami of covers that is full of bacteria and masks and
yes,
syringes and all that stuff.
Right. Just in closing, again, I think the reason that I was drawn to your piece, and I think people love these top 10s and then the thinking behind why they were chosen. Predictable question. I hate to be predictable with someone like you, but I am interested in knowing who you think are the great dust jacket designers and why. Dead and alive.
Oh no, sure. I'm trying to think of everybody. Roy Kuhlman is one of those people. Again, for me, and I would put John Gaul in that box as well. It's like they were both, alive at very different times, but they were both gateway drugs for me.
Why?
Well, I think just because the thing that's exciting about book covers is the same thing that's exciting about posters, or to a slightly lesser extent advertising now, is that there's a chance for art to sneak up on you and claim your attention in a place that you don't go looking for art. I've always been stoked by that possibility. Again, it's in publishing, it becomes a harder and harder fight the more you go on.
What does that mean?
Well, my situation's a little bit different again, because I don't have access to interfacing with an editor or a human proper publisher when I'm making my case with a lot of the jackets that I'm working on. If I'm designing a jacket, I'm usually only ever interfacing directly with an art director publishing house who's relaying stuff back and forth. So like my my advocacy is limited, or at least my personal advocacy is limited. If I'm really lucky, I'm linked up with another art director who's as much of an advocate as I am.
It's getting more and more difficult to show a kind of an individual creativity versus a commercial imperative. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I don't know. I have to think about that answer a little bit more. I might have just been about to talk out of my ass.
Should we leave that in?
I mean, I'd prefer it if we not, but it's your podcast. We have so much authority and advocacy on that front. I used to really campaign for this stuff, and now I'm lucky enough they come to me, and I work on them if I have the time and the enthusiasm and the strength to summon up the will to start drawing and sketching stuff out after my daughter has gone to sleep at night. But I'm not the sort of person that gets hired for a particular look. So I guess it's, when I think about great designers like Roy Kuhlman or John or Alvin Lustig or Barbara de Wilde or Carin Goldberg or Louise Fili, it's like they all found ways to either, that's a very eclectic group of designers that I just cited, but like I feel like somebody like Roy Kuhlman or Alvin Lustig was able to take a particular aesthetic that they had and apply it across a pretty broad range and do it very artfully in a way that wasn't beating a reader over the head with subject. You'd be able to create a mood and a sense of mystery around something that you wanted to know more about. And then you have somebody like Barbara de Wilde, who can absolutely do that. I don't think she designs covers anymore. In fact, I'm reasonably confident that she doesn't. But for the whole of Barbara's work, like Barbara can do incredible things with a piece of fiction and create like a real sense of alchemy and mystery. One of the craziest book covers that I've ever seen, and I guess crazy again is the wrong word for this, but Barbara designed a cover for a book about milk. And it's a really and it's a stunning cover because of its starkness, because of how she's handled the type, because of how she's positioned this bottle. She's framed this bottle of milk in the center of this black background as an art piece. And I'm sitting here. This was years before I even met her, but I'm standing there in the bookstore staring at this book about milk, thinking to myself, I am not the sort of person that wants to read a book about milk, but here I am holding this thing.
Yep.
And wanting to know more about it.
That's the first step, isn't it? That's the first step. Yeah,
it really is. And she seems to have, she's this person that can create that sensation over and over and over and over again. Mm. So yeah, if we go back to your original question, I'd certainly put her at the top, as well as Carin Goldberg and Louise Fili.
Okay.
They haunt me.
They haunt you. That's interesting.
But just when I'm working. The rest of the time, they're not haunting me.
And it's because it's a kind of a jealous haunting?
Yeah. Most of my moves and choices are rooted in that, or at least trying to take those elements of negativity and trying to remonstrate them in a positive way through, whatever else I'm spitting back.
Okay. So finally, you mentioned and referenced used bookstores, which is a passion of mine. I've taken thousands of photographs of used bookstores, and of course, I'm a collector. Do you collect dust jackets? I sure hope so.
Well, yeah. I think before, yes. The short answer is yes, I do.
And how crazily?
How crazily? I live in a not large apartment in Brooklyn, so I do have to be a little bit. Oh, I'm sorry. What?
Is the cat step in here?
Oh yeah, my wife probably has lots of things to say about that. My wife would prefer that I cut loose much of what I have.
Yeah, I'm in exactly the same boat.
A lot of what I have, though, also tethers back to the kind of reader you aspire to be. Also, I don't think I've crossed over to a level of madness where I'm buying books exclusively for their covers.
Okay, I crossed that river a long time ago.
Oh, congratulations! You're keeping me employed.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Like I don't buy anything that I don't set out to read, but I do believe very firmly that you can purchase something in a moment that doesn't necessarily obligate you to read it immediately. That it can sit there and kind of taunt you for a couple of years. I'm told this isn't good. By the time I actually get around to reading it, maybe I'll even change my mind. But I've got a copy of Ken Kesey's Sailor Song that has these beautiful flaps and interior art that was designed and assembled and put together by Michael Ian Kay. And I've had that for going on 30 years. And one of these days I am going to read it.
One of these days I'm going to read every single one of the books in my library. Yeah.
But I like having it there and just kind of having it stare at me periodically like some kind of talisman.
It's like a cheap art collection.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, I'm so happy to hear that you're a collector. That is very important.
Your joy is my wife's misery. So thank you.
Our wives would get along well together.
Very likely. Yeah, my wife murders books. I can't lend her.
Yeah. Okay. So
giving her a paper book, giving her a paperback is essentially the same thing as setting it on fire.
Oh dear. Okay. That isn't the note we want to end on, though.
Probably not. Try and land on something more optimistic. I'm sorry. She doesn't actually burn them. She just puts them in her bag with the force of a Hadron Collider.
Okay. So where are you headed then? Where are you headed?
I'm going exactly nowhere, but
You're enjoying the journey at least.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, I thought you meant physically. Where am I physically traveling? Oh, I'm just going right back to work.
I'm talking about your career. I'm talking about what you're doing, that kind of thing.
Oh, where am I going? Oh, all right. I'm sorry. I thought you meant where I'm I'm going right back to work after this, but I'm going where I feel like I've been like fortunate enough and entrusted to be. I feel like I'm in a spot where I have a chance every day to kind of nudge visual literacy in a more expansive place. And I never really know where that's going to manifest or what it's going to look like, but I feel incredibly lucky in that regard. I feel like I've got a chance to do something like that in some small way every day. So where I'm going is to try and take that small thing and hopefully make it bigger and bigger and bigger. I think whatever looks weird and unusual now is going to look very, very commonplace in a couple of years. So I just keep looking for ways to swim in the weirdness.
That's very good. I figure I should start collecting the New York Times book review section now.
You might. Well, I mean, you might need to shellac it if you wanted to, preserve it. I don't know. I guess we could also use smelling salts in the heater, but yeah, invest in a lot of spray fixative.
Okay, that's fantastic. That's great advice. I appreciate it. And I really appreciate you bringing both sides of your brain to this conversation. Thank you.
Oh, no, I appreciate it. Thank you.
I've been speaking with Matt Dorfman, who is the artistic director of the New York Times book review section and also a freelance designer. Is that good?
Designers fair, illustrators fair.
What's your website, Matt?
I'm half embarrassed to say. Well, no, I'm not. I'm sorry. I was embarrassed, but now I'm not. It's metalmother.com.
Metalmother.com.
It's named after a song that got stuck in my head in my mid-20s, and I bought the URL, and I'm not going to give it up because it's still a very good song that means a lot to me.
And it's pretty weird too.
There's that too. I don't know what it means yet either.
Let's leave it at that. Thanks again.
Appreciate it, Nigel. Thank you.